Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here of 3&D Basketball, and today I'm breaking down the 2020 MVP race with the help of some machine learning models. Now, this year's race has been really interesting to follow as there hasn't been a clear consensus as to who should be the MVP according to the media and the people that are inevitably making this vote. Obviously, Giannis Antetokounmpo has had a remarkable season for the Milwaukee Bucks, putting up monstrous numbers and leading his team to first in the NBA in terms of standings, but a lot of people have contended that LeBron James is really deserving of the award this year, having one of his best seasons of his remarkable career, leading the Lakers to first in the Western Conference, and having a career high in assists, playing the point guard position, which is an amazing feat when you look back at the rest of his career. But then you have more people adding on to that. If LeBron should be the first, then Anthony Davis should really be the one they should be arguing for because he's putting up better numbers than LeBron. And then James Harden's just getting overlooked by everybody, putting up 34 points per game and solid rebounds and assists, and no one's really noticing that. So what it really comes down to when you're listening to people talk about who they think should be the MVP of that year is their arbitrary and subjective criteria as to what makes an MVP for them. And that makes it tough to really break down to really have a clear view on who is going to win the MVP and who's really deserving of that MVP award, especially when you're only listening to one or two different talking heads. So I decided to take a look at the MVP race from a little bit of a different perspective. What I ended up doing is I ended up taking every NBA player stats from every NBA season since 1980, the introduction of the three-point line, and paired that with each player's share of the MVP votes that they won that season, so it was 0 for a lot of the players, but ended up compiling all of that data to use to build 5 different machine learning models that would output the probability of each player in the NBA in the current season to win an MVP award. So I'll break that down here. So all in all, I had about 19,500 different data points to build each of these models, and the stats I decided to really take into account to build these models were firstly the simple ones: points per game, rebounds per game, assists per game, field goal percentage, which actually ended up performing better than true shooting percentage, so I found that kind of interesting. A couple of advanced stats, so value over replacement player and win shares for the specific player, and I also took into account the team standing over the course of that season, as well as whether or not they were an all-star, because those are all pretty important predictors as to if a player should win MVP. So without further ado, let's take a look at the first model we built and see what its output was. So the first model we ended up using support vector regression to build, and it gave some really interesting results. So the top 7 ended up being pretty reasonable, gave solid outputs. I was really happy with them. Giannis Antetokounmpo ended up being first by a long shot and winning the MVP. Then LeBron James, James Harden, you can see the graph on the screen. But then it gets pretty weird after you get outside the top 7, as maybe the narrative thing crept into the machine learning model and said it needed a Golden State Warrior on its MVP probability list, and Jordan Poole ended up being the 8th most likely player to win MVP according to this model, and it gets weirder from there. JP Macrora, I don't even know who he is, Darius Garland, a lot of guys that just don't really make sense to be in the MVP race, but not a bad start. Not a bad start. The top 7 were pretty solid, and we'll see if Jordan Poole gets any more MVP votes with the other sorts of models. So for the next model, I ended up using linear regression to make the predictions, and this one performed really bad on the training and test sets as well, but it did give a sort of reasonable order as to the output of MVP share. You can see it on the screen. James Harden was first, Giannis Antetokounmpo second, Anthony Davis third, LeBron fourth, which is the top 4 you'd expect in something like this. And Kawhi's up there, Damian Lillard, Tatum, and all that, but it doesn't have much variance, much differentiation in terms of who's getting what MVP share, and it outputted 2 Celtics before Pascal Siakam in this vote, so I kind of just scrapped it once I saw that and went on to the next one. So the next model ended up using decision tree regression to build the models to make the predictions, and this one had a much higher performance on the training and test sets, but really gave the wonkiest order in terms of list. You can see it on the screen. It starts off with LeBron James, so all the people that are saying LeBron should win MVP are probably going to like this model and use this to back it up, but then it goes Giannis, James Harden, but this is where it gets weird. Russell Westbrook ends up being 4th, and I know he's having a really statistically strong season. Luka's there, which I guess is reasonable, but Kyrie, who played barely any games, Anthony Davis is a lot lower than you'd expect. Zach LaVine is in the top 10, Bradley Beal, so this one was pretty weird to look at the order. It made sense as to why it performed better than the other two, because as in real life cases, only a few players get a high share of the MVP vote, and then it sort of flattens out, and which makes it perform better in linear regression, and Jordan Poole's not getting votes in this model, so at least there's that. But the next couple ended up providing a lot more reasonable sort of results for the MVP predictions. So this model definitely ended up being the best one so far. I used random forest regression to build this one, and performed a lot better than all of them on the training and test sets, and gave the most reasonable order so far in terms of players and which it's sorted. I'll throw it up on the screen. Giannis, obviously the overwhelming favorite in this one. LeBron James, James Harden tying for 2nd and 3rd, basically, neck and neck. Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard, they're up there, Luka, and then it sort of gets into the guys that aren't on the greatest of teams but have remarkable box score numbers, and it's interesting that that sort of came into play because team standing is one of the features in this, but this is how this model ended up throwing it out. So guys like Trae Young and Russell Westbrook, I guess Westbrook's on a solid team, but Bradley Beal, even Lillard, who's not in the playoffs, they're getting the benefit of the doubt on this one over guys like maybe Tatum and Siakam who are on better teams. But interesting output. This one clearly puts Giannis at the top, and he's sort of been at the top of most of these lists, so we're leaning towards a certain direction in our final output. But let's take a look at the last model before we make any judgments. For the last model, I ended up using k-nearest neighbors to build the models and make the predictions, and this one is what you came here to see. This was the best performing model in the training and test sets, and gave the most reasonable output in my opinion, was the best performing model. So I'll throw the stats up on the screen. Giannis Antetokounmpo, the overwhelming favorite over the rest of the competition, and I think that's what most people are saying is going to happen. Most people, from what I understand, have Giannis as their main MVP vote, but Anthony Davis, interestingly enough, ahead of James Harden and LeBron James. LeBron James, who's kind of been talked about as the second front runner, he's put 4th in this list behind Anthony Davis and James Harden. That's an interesting sort of way that it got picked up. Kawhi Leonard, Nikola Jokic, Russell Westbrook, guys having really solid statistical seasons on good teams. It makes sense that they're up there over guys like Trae Young and Bradley Beal, who made the top 10 in the last list. Damian Lillard, he's just has 2 solid numbers to keep out, and he's just outside the playoffs, so it makes sense he's this high. Luka Doncic, same sort of boat as Damian Lillard, and Kyle Lowry in the top 10, you know it's performing well when Kyle Lowry's in your top 10 for MVP voting. It's taking everything into account, but really interesting to see this last one put out, and yeah, no, k-nearest neighbors seem to perform the best on this data set. So when we take a look at all of the data, all of the outputs from each of the models, we can definitely see some trends going on. And I think the first one we'll take a look at is the fact there's really only 4 players that should be considered, and that's the case mostly with every season. And clearly from the outputs we see Giannis, LeBron, AD, and James Harden being the 4 guys that are usually at the top of each prediction, and this makes sense. And when you listen to the people that are sort of speaking out on who should win the MVP award, it seems like 3 of those guys get talked about the most. Obviously, Giannis being top of standing and remarkable stats, LeBron James being LeBron James, and Anthony Davis being his teammate on the LA Lakers. But James Harden's the guy that kind of gets left out of these discussions, and he's performed higher than usually LeBron or AD, even Giannis in a couple of these models. And I think deservedly so, even though I'll make my prediction after. But James Harden has had a good enough season in terms of standing playoff seeding where he should be in contention in terms of his standing if he has good enough box score numbers, and he has good enough box score numbers. He's putting up almost 35 points per game, 7 assists, 6 rebounds on pretty solid shooting, so it's tough to really ignore those numbers, which I think a lot of people are doing. I think he should be just in the conversation just as much as a guy like LeBron or AD, but that leads us to the final prediction that I'll sort of throw out there in my interpretation of all this data, and I think clearly Giannis Antetokounmpo is the clear favorite to win this award. He led most of the models. He was tops in each one of them, and the ones that performed the best, He had the greatest distance. He was just overwhelmingly the favorite. And the guy is leading the NBA in terms of the standings. He's led the Milwaukee Bucks to the top seed in the entire NBA. And his stats are remarkable, and he's doing them in not that many minutes per game. So he's remarkably efficient. I think it's going to be weird if Giannis doesn't end up winning it, but we did see a couple models output LeBron James as the top, so maybe we'll see something crazy happen. Some people will buy into the decision tree classifier or regression model, but it's interesting to look at, and who knows, maybe Jordan Poole will will end up getting a few MVP votes. But that's just my take on the data. Let me know what you guys think about everything that was outputted, how the models performed, and who you think will be the actual MVP this season, who's deserving of it. But yeah, let me know down in the comment section below. Obviously, this is the first video on this channel, and I have a lot of interesting things I want to push forward with this, and I want to hear your feedback on maybe varying the types of videos. And if you're technically savvy, I have all the code up on my GitHub, which I'll link in the description if you want to help me make models that perform better. But you're the best for making this far. Check out the Instagram, just launched that today, so really appreciate everyone checking that out. Really appreciate everyone coming here, watching this first video, and stay tuned for more NBA analysis, discussion, everything involving the NBA. You can be found here. So appreciate you making this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all the cool stuff. We don't have a Twitter on this account just yet, but you're the best. Cheers.